Funny stuff. Joining us now, Senior Fellow in the Center for Preventive Action at the Council on Foreign Relations, Micah Zenko. He's out with his forthcoming book, Red Team, How to Succeed by Thinking Like the Enemy. You were just describing off-camera red teams. What are, how they exist, and who employs them. Go through that. It's interesting.
So a red team is anything, a semi-independent group that helps an organization or a military command or intelligence agency see the world in a different way. One of the things that red teamers emphasize is you cannot, whether it's this institution or anywhere, you cannot grade your own homework. You are the least likely people to really challenge the assumptions, challenge the conventional wisdom, understand the world through your adversary's eyes, and adapt accordingly. We are very resistant to change and resistant to self-evaluation and criticism. And so what a red team does is it does it essentially for you. So if you have a new piece of software coming out, you hire people, they try to hack it because your own software team won't find the vulnerabilities. Before the Osama bin Laden raid in 2011, people who were not read into the intelligence and were outside of the CIA were called in at the last minute to give their own independent assessment of the likelihood of bin Laden being there. So it's really trying to see things.
And what was their finding?
So this was the National Counterterrorism Center, and the problem was the people at the CIA were really good at finding terrorists and killing them. And so their estimates of bin Laden being there were up to 90 to 100%. And if you know anything about the intelligence business, that's very doubtful because there was no physical evidence that he was actually there. So the director of the National Counterterrorism Center hired 3 people. They gave them 48 hours. They gave them all the intelligence. And he said, I want you to come back with your own estimates. And then he met with them all independently. And their estimates were 75, 60, and 45%. So they were much more skeptical than the CIA was.
And red teams, like you mentioned, the NYPD would use red teams. Why would the NYPD use red teams?
So the NYPD uses these in what they're called commissioner's tabletop exercises, which I go through in my book. So before the marathon, before the Pope comes, they go through a series of very rigorous simulations of scenarios, like, for example, runners coming up First Avenue at the 16-mile mark start collapsing and feeling dizzy and throwing up. Now, are they sick? The water tainted, and what's being done to protect the water, and what sort of contingency plans should you have in place. And in the absence of those tabletop exercises, people really don't think through those sorts of problems.
You know, Michael, one of the things you were talking about off camera was that red teams routinely break into buildings, and that made me wonder, well, what about security cameras? And you said security cameras are usually misplaced. Talk about that. Talk about that. Why is it so easy to break into buildings, and how can security, the hackers or the burglars redirect cameras so that no one can actually see them? So
whether it's a computer network or a building, there are a series of industry best practices and standards. And these are usually insured, imposed, or industry standards. And they're pretty good, but the fact of the matter is that offense always beats defense over time. With enough surveillance, with enough careful thinking, with enough deviousness, you can break into any defended system. And the people I interview in the book demonstrate this over and over and over again. You assume the role of a HVAC person coming in to fix the air conditioners. You probably have computer problems in this building now. They'll come in as the computer guy to fix them. They'll pose as somebody coming in to do a book interview, for example. So you can social engineer, you can break in. So your defended system is probably pretty good, but it's not good enough for the adversary who really wants to get at what you have that is valuable.
Red teams, who are these people? Who populates these red teams?
So I interviewed over 200 of them in the course of about 3 years, and they're weird, interesting people. By definition, they think and see the world differently.
It's like Mark Halpern.
The ultimate red teamer.
I mean, some of the best red teamers tend to be very young and they don't know any better. And then in the military, there's a phrase, it's called the terminal colonel. This is somebody who has reached the 06 level as a colonel, mid-career officer, and they know they're not going any higher, and they're just not afraid to speak the truth anymore. They also are people with some proficient sets of skills, like hackers, like people who have background in foreign countries and languages. But most importantly is they're fearless. They're willing to speak the truth to their bosses when they know it challenges conventional wisdom.
Anything that the hackers did that you know about that amaze you?
They can do anything. I mean, the one story I go through in my book is what's called a femto cell. A femto cell is a little cell phone repeating tower. I'm sure you have them in this building to boost weak signals. And they got access to one Verizon femto cell, and they hacked it quite easily. And then in the course of hacking it, they learned that they could not just capture the data from any phone that associated with it, and by your phone associates with femto cells whether you know it or not. They could clone your phone and send calls, text messages, voicemails from a phone that looked like to the incoming caller was from your phone. And then this has been done 3 different times by different femto cells of all companies. So even though people know you can do this, hackers eventually find a way in.
That's a good excuse for me now when I call someone I'm not supposed to call. I say, yeah, it was a red team thing. I never called you. The book is Red Team, How to Succeed by Thinking Like the Enemy. Micah Zenko, this is really interesting. Thanks very much.